I'm Mary Beth Sheridan. I'm a reporter and editor at the Washington Post, and I'm a Neiman Fellow this year. Thank you guys so much for being here. So I'd like to introduce Ann Friedman for our final panel, How Internet Killed My Career and Made Me a Star. Ann has been a journalist for a little less than a decade, although she's been kind of a scribe since taking up the family newsletter as a child. When she finished journalism school, she took one of those, as she describes it, desperate first out of college jobs doing communications, and quickly realized that was not where she belonged, and moved into an internship for Mother Jones. And she's been at numerous publications ever since. She is currently a columnist for New York Magazine's website and the Columbia Journalism Review, and she appears in at least a dozen other places regularly. She's the former executive editor of Good Magazine, and when she and her colleagues were fired en masse from that publication, they launched Tomorrow, a crowd-funded narrative. Please join me in welcoming Ann for the wrap of the conference.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around. So let's see if this will load. I wanted to talk a little bit about the title of this talk. It's super awkward, right? Like, I didn't realize it would be said all weekend long and people would be like, how it made me a star. And then I realized it's not really an accurate characterization of my relationship with the internet anyway, because this is really a love story. And I feel like on Sunday, before we're ready to go, it's like you want to be told a story. It's not going to break your heart, right? So, our story begins in 2009, a time when I thought I was above the internet. I worked at a magazine called The American Prospect in Washington, D.C., where I was focused almost exclusively on the monthly print edition, editing the front of book and the feature well. Like most journalists my age, I had spent the first few years of my career as a blogger and a junior web editor. So it's not like I didn't use the internet, or that I saw it as a cesspool of cat pictures and celebrity gossip and porn. But in the grand scheme of my career, I considered the internet to be a lowly stepping stone to something better, a way station on the way to a real job on the print side of a real publication where I would edit real things with a real budget. In other words, in 2009, I'd made it out of what I considered to be the web ghetto, and I was reluctant to look back. Here are some things I said in a GChat conversation with a friend 2 days before I joined Twitter. I'm too busy for Twitter. Do you think I will be shunned at a tech conference like South by Southwest if I don't have a Twitter account? I really don't want one. I want to resist for as long as possible. I'm trying to stem the internet's encroachment into my life. Forgive the mixed metaphor, this is GChat. This is from a GChat 34 days after I joined Twitter. I love Twitter. Dude, I am totally converted to Twitter love times 80 billion. So my fear was unfounded. And at this time, yeah, right, okay, sorry, I forgot. Obligatory, let's all laugh at that. At this time, I was also starting to get bored with my day job. Isn't this how most people fall in love with the internet? It's not cliche when it happens to you, though. It feels so real. Anyway, so I profess to still really love editing print features, but the internet was kind of starting to catch my eye, and I was getting a little bored. I had joined Tumblr, and was really delighted by this sort of pop-up blogging culture it fostered, and these short-lived creations that could comment on the news and add to it in really unexpected ways from really unexpected avenues. And I also loved when, in early 2010, Mother Jones reporter Mac McClelland was on a reporting trip in the Gulf Coast after the BP oil spill, and she was live tweeting it, as a reporter. And I think that, many reporters have run into problems with this approach, of course, but this was the first time I had sort of seen it as, oh wow, this is an insight into the details that are going to come to make a feature-length story, but it's also, like, in some ways more relevant now than when her feature is going to come out in a month. And this was all really sexy to me. So when I started talking about quitting my job, mostly because I could no longer handle living in DC, this is pretty accurate. my friends would ask what I wanted to do next, and this is a reasonable question, something college graduates are very used to hearing, and despite my burgeoning love for the internet, my answer was, I'd like to go work for a print magazine. And the internet was fun, and I'd come to love certain aspects of it, but it wasn't like I could really see us settling down together. It was like, and I wasn't delusional. I knew that print was dying. But it was just more like I wanted to be around for its hospice care period. I was like, this is going to be the last chance that I have to work for, like, the rest of my career isn't going to feature print publications, so I better get it in now. So at the end of 2010, I ended up quitting my job without another one lined up. I got rid of all of my possessions that would not fit in my Honda Accord and took a 5,500-mile road trip by myself. And this was sort of the first time I felt free to experiment with putting a little bit more of my personality online with my own name attached. I had been a columnist for the magazine for several years, but it was a magazine about politics and policy, and while the column hinged on my political opinions, I never really wrote about myself in a personal way. I didn't really make jokes. So here's an example of one thing I published on that road trip, which is essentially a personal essay about my road trip in the format of an advice column. So you can kind of, this is where I really started to experiment with storytelling and form on the internet. And this is all true facts. This would hold up to fact check, used pants as a napkin, etc. Anyway. So I was in this state of blissful unemployment when I got a call from Good Magazine, which was looking for an executive editor. And this was basically a dream job. It was in Los Angeles, 3,000 miles from the stuffy confines of New York and DC media, which is a whole other keynote, but anyway. And it was, it wasn't a risky startup either. It wasn't sort of brand new. It had been around since 2006. Granted, I could not recall ever reading a single article in the magazine or on the website, but I had seen the infographics, and somebody must have been reading because they had a decent amount of traffic and 500,000 Twitter followers. The magazine's tagline, "For people who give a damn," was appealing to my political sensibilities, and its founders, a billionaire and his two best friends who had never worked anywhere else, were looking for a professional type editor, someone to increase traffic, but also to infuse the daily web magazine and quarterly print magazine with some credibility. By making journalism. Plus, there was a budget, a decent budget, and I got the job. And also pretty accurate. So I had three big theories about making a quality magazine in the digital era. And one is just about personality. Magazines, I've always believed, are the people who make them. And this has always been true, but the rise of social media means writers and editors are more public-facing than ever. And increasingly, people connect with and engage with and trust other people as opposed to sort of an institution or a brand. And I think that this is bad for a lot of companies, but it's kind of great for journalism because we're humans who make this stuff. Anyway, and the other thing, too, is that smart magazines have a collective purpose, a collective personality, a point of view, a unique but unified outlook on the world, and a reason for readers to engage with them. So I set about to hire people who loved reporting, writing, and the internet. After all, hiring people to make a magazine with me was essentially inviting them into what had become a pretty serious relationship with my now live-in lover, the internet. Like in my bed every night, the internet. I hired people who wanted to tell reported stories and weren't afraid to infuse them with a point of view or a personal anecdote when it was called for. I hired people who were already on Twitter, not just using it to push out their own work, but to find new story ideas and connect with sources and readers. And I hired people who fit with the guiding point of view of the magazine, which was future-oriented, optimistic, pragmatic. So the next one, editing. I mean, you thought this was a token, new media speech, and this is a really old idea. But yeah, I love editing. It still matters. And in order for the whole compelling personality thing to work, you need really deft editors who know how to let individual writers' voices flourish while ensuring they meet the magazine's journalistic standards, fit with its worldview, match its tone. Often the word curator is used to mean people aggregating content. But I think this term is also a great way to describe one aspect of an editor's job. What is a homepage or a table of contents but the result of curation, culling the most fitting ideas from dozens of possibilities? Editors ensure that the magazine's perspective comes through. I mean, if your magazine is incoherent and purposeless, no one is going to want to show up to read it, let alone stick around to have a conversation about it or share it with their friends. So my theory was that if I made Good more coherent, trained readers as to what to expect from it. Maybe they would come back. Maybe traffic would go up. And maybe not quickly, but steadily. And so the final one is story, not surprising given that we're all in this room at a narrative conference. Stories have and always will be central to compelling people to read. It's also central to my belief that online people will read and share quality stuff, not merely lowbrow crap, if it moves them. So like really makes them feel something. And I take a broad view of storytelling formats. I see narrative in flowcharts, in gifs, obviously, in a string of 140 character details, but also in new long form avenues. You know, my pals who run Symbolia and the Atavist and a lot of people who are running around this weekend fit that bill. And these things are all finding audiences. Like, you know, I believe that, you know, the fact that print is flagging does not mean that, you know, story is dead. And story will find a way is the lesson. This is the Dr. Ian Malcolm theory of optimism about the future of journalism. Story finds a way. And here's the point where my personal internet love story starts to get a little bit shaky. So after I've been on the job for a few months, I'm starting to get a little bit more confident, and we're kind of putting this plan into action. We start to have some data. You know, not great data, but you know, this is the great thing, another great thing about the internet. And traffic was indeed going up steadily, you know, a few big leaps at times. And it turns out that people did want stories. That's exciting, they like it. But they also like utter crap. So these things are not mutually exclusive. And so, you know, it sort of turned out, I'll use the two extremes, that our most trafficked long-form narrative stories, including, you know, this piece that the aforementioned Mac McClellan wrote about PTSD, and a couple of other reported things, a really long thing we did explaining the recession and sort of a sequential infographic thing, were, you know, far more popular than our, you know, fluffiest traffic baiting posts. But while the long-form stories garnered exponentially more readers, they were also a bigger gamble because of the resources required to produce them. So for every one long-form piece that was a hit, or sort of like real piece of journalism that we'd really invested in, there was at least one that wasn't, and often two or three. And this, you know, this is something that means that it's a risk. It's a risk when you have a limited budget and limited time. And I think this is why a lot of publications default to sort of the easy click, because it's a low time investment, and it's easier to predict, okay, we produce X number of these, traffic is gonna look like this, and then we know how many page views we're going to be able to deliver. It's a clearer formula. And you know, to be someone who loves long form and reporting in online journalism today is to kind of be a gambler, which is sexy and exciting. We don't get to be that very often, you know? Anyway, so my solution was to publish a mix of stuff. You know, mostly reported pieces and some opinion and essay, but, you know, a couple of lighter, like, clicky things to round it out so that we could ease the resource burden. Our staff was only 10, so it wasn't like we could really produce, you know, dozens of articles a day. And so my bosses, who I mentioned, you know, these are guys who were about my age, maybe a year or two older, who were steeped in startup and design culture. They were really into my theories about, like, you know, why we would want to, you know, invest in story and editing and personality. And but, you know, like, we weren't like the best pals. They're kind of bros. Like, they're kind of like those guys, backwards mesh baseball caps, tossing footballs around the office, eating beef jerky during meetings. It's like, you know, and you know, so we weren't like the best communicators. We're coming from very different places. I don't know how I come across, but I'm not really into like baseball caps and beef jerky. And so, you know, it turns out the devil is in the details with this conversation. You know, they're into the ideas of like personality and theory, except that, you know, rather than apply that to journalistic professionals, they became increasingly interested in the idea of us getting big name thought leaders who weren't writers. Maybe you guys have heard this term. It's like a real popular term lately, thought leaders. It's guys like Richard Branson or like the guy from Tom's Shoes, who slap their names on 400-word missives of like conventional wisdom and publish them. You know, HuffPo gets kind of a bad rap for being a place where a lot of this stuff is published, but you'll see other sites starting to do this, like LinkedIn has a whole like follow our thought leaders, which is just, you know, recycled management tips. And I think that, you know, the theory here is that, you know, big names will create clicks. People aren't actually reading anyway, so they'll see a name and that will do the job. They also took a very literal view of creating community, acquiring a failed social networking startup. And they insisted that we stop using the word magazine and start referring to ourselves as a community platform. My response was, have you ever heard anyone say, I love that community platform? People always say, I love that magazine, right? And when it came to editors, they were more interested in the sort of, finding stuff other people have already written elsewhere and linking to it from our site kind of curation, rather than the sort of like cultivating your own group of voices and sort of culling ideas form of curation. And sometimes they loved our long-form storytelling, definitely, but almost too much. And I think this was referred to earlier in this conference as the snowfall effect. When my bosses found themselves crying at their desks while reading a 3,500-word essay about a woman's boyfriend dying of cancer, they suggested they would be stoked to see one of these every day. There was a lot of stoked in my life back then, you guys. It's like a really loaded word for me now. Other times when we were up against the wall to meet monthly traffic deliverables, they would make the opposite demand, more slideshows. And this is the more cowbell version of like approach to web publishing, which is just like, oh, what, we're not doing it quite right, like more slideshows, like keep hitting it, And, but then that would sort of fade after the traffic crunch, the need for traffic went away. And it didn't really matter that traffic was sort of climbing steadily and our reputation was really improving and people were actually talking about the work more, which feeds a lot more into this sort of people who give a damn conception of the publication. But I think they were really disappointed that there wasn't sort of a hockey stick of growth, which, I told you, startup bros. I don't know if anyone here knows that culture, but it's a thing. Anyway. So let's just take a moment with this because, yeah. Anyway, I tried repeatedly to make my case that readers are community, editors are curators, and writers are thought leaders. During this period of transition, I need my air quotes gif again, transition, one of my friends suggested I try acting classes to learn how to hide my obvious frustration and disdain. This, I later realized, is precisely the sort of thing your friends tell you right before you're about to be fired. Thanks for that. You're all storytellers, so there are dozens of ways to tell any story, dozens of ways to structure any narrative, dozens of ways to interpret and draw meaning from a series of events. One version of this story is that the internet was cheating on me all along. I thought it was a place for innovative storytelling and modern magazine journalism, when in fact, people mostly just wanted to click on cat videos and baking soda cleaning tips, because those things are safer and easier to produce, and therefore more appealing to publishers than quality reporting and storytelling. And so the whole apparatus is designed to work against people who want to make magazines and make good journalism. Plus, nobody reads anymore. Woe is journalism. That's one theory. That's one way to read this. But there is another narrative, which is that while the internet narrows some options and some opportunities, it radically expands others. And this was brought into stark relief after we were all fired in June. So a few months prior, during a bout of stress-induced insomnia, I had started a Tumblr blog called Real Talk from Your Editor. It looked kind of like this. It was very much like the experience you're having today. It's like, and wherein I just sort of made little observations about my work life. And this is also really interesting about the gap between much of journalism and internet culture. For me, this sort of style of meme GIF blog was like had almost jumped the shark already. Was feeling like it was already kind of played out, and I was like, oh, I'll just do it for me because it seems funny. And I would get these emails from experienced journalists who were like, how do you make those little movies? And I was just like, wow, there is a lot. It was really revealing in a lot of ways. But it was quite popular, and it was through this rather frivolous blog that I got to know a lot more editors than I had previously known, who then popped up after I was fired to offer me work. I landed a weekly column at New York Magazine and another one at the Columbia Journalism Review that now bears the Real Talk name and is kind of where I continue. It still has GIFs in it, but it's much more like substantive than the silly Tumblr. I also got together with my colleagues and created a single issue of a new magazine we called Tomorrow. We raised the money for it on the crowdfunding website Kickstarter, meeting our fundraising goal within 5 hours and making $45,000 by the end of the month. And this is the magazine we made. I'm really proud of it. It was just nominated for an Utne Media Award in the General Excellence category. Thank you. And these are the people I made it with. And we are way drunk at our launch party here. But you know, it's like, I feel like I like this because it gives a sense of our dynamic. This is another great thing about GIFs. You know, it's like, you can see how we love each other. Anyway, so the internet and I didn't break up after all. We are more in love than ever. And the past few years have taught me that while existing journalistic institutions matter, building your own network, community, and following is like an insurance policy. It's often a path to more work. It helps to have a why you do what you do and care about things bigger than yourself and articulate that on the internet to explain like why you are a journalist and to associate yourself with other people who share that view. Finally, also to have a good story to tell about yourself. And I don't mean that in a really self-absorbed, like I know I just told you my whole work story as if it's super fascinating, but I think that, you know, being able to tell a story about Tomorrow made it more than just media startup. Made it really compelling. It was a redemption story. And so readers invested, who had invested in our work at Good or maybe had invested in us individually, something as low level as following us on Twitter, were compelled to invest in our follow-up project. And I do mean that literally too. You know, they invested and gave us money. So I don't know. And my final point too is that the do-it-yourself-itness of the internet, you know, these sort of passion projects that maybe you do during a bout of insomnia or like with your friends or can really lead to paychecks and to work that you do find meaningful that's maybe more ongoing and long term. And I don't know, it's always a rule, it's become a rule of thumb for me that if an idea resonates with me, it probably resonates with other people too. Maybe not to the same level, but anyway. The internet just offers so many opportunities to just try. And so this is why I become one of those obnoxious people that says getting fired was one of the best things to ever happen to me. I totally mean it. And I'm really happy I never took those acting classes. That's it, I'm done. All right, questions? No one ever wants to go first. Oh, yeah. I can't see, yeah. That's fine.
Can you tell me more about Tomorrow? Did I understand it was a one-time publication?
Right.
And if so, why?
Well, the economics of print publishing are horrible. You know, I mean, basically, so in order to, I think that we could have raised more money on Kickstarter. It was really interesting when we sat in the room together. It was like this, it was like everyone was on the couch when we tried to pick a fundraising goal. Some people were like, maybe we could make $5,000, I don't know. And I was like, 100K! And so, you know, we ended up setting the goal like at like 15,000 or something, which I think given our, like a rough estimate was what it would, only what it would cost to like physically print it. And we were like, maybe we could get all of our friends to work for free, maybe we could do everything for free, bare bones. And I really think that because we met the goal so quickly, if we had had more time to like, you know, get people to like push us over a higher bar, we would have made more money. But so that said, it's just, I mean, we basically worked for free the entire time. You know, we paid everyone something, and we published on, we have a Tumblr, tomorrowthemag.tumblr.com, where we published our full budget, and we're totally transparent about everything we brought in and how. We got some sponsorships, and so it was great to be able to pay everyone a little something, but momentum runs out really fast, and the idea that we could A, raise money for a second issue in a similar fashion and get the same amount, and B, get people, or even feel good about asking people to continue to work with us for such a low rate in an ongoing way, didn't really feel like something any of us wanted to do. And so, yeah, so I think that right now we kind of think of Tomorrow as an editorial collective, a group of people who are still very much, you know, peers and collaborators. Everyone has landed new full-time gigs. We're at Fast Company and ESPN, the magazine, and Gawker and Slate and Marie Claire, and you know, everyone has like found sort of a part-time or full-time new home. But but yeah, but I would not rule out future collaborations, but like tomorrow issue 2 is not happening.
How would you convert people who are not wanting to be converted to social media and other forms of, I don't know, output?
I don't know. I mean, like, how do you? What's that?
That are already established in their business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know. For me, it's sort of like if you're a journalist, you're naturally, and presumably, a naturally curious person who wants to absorb more about the world around you, in the sense that, you know, I can, and granted, it's sort of a different experience than like walking around your neighborhood or like going out on a reporting trip, but the fact that I can like roll over in bed in the morning and grab my phone, and before I even put my glasses on, like see like what's happening with like a lot of like people everywhere. See, like I struggle to understand how that cannot be appealing if you are someone with a drive to do reporting and produce journalism. So maybe what I just described is like a shame-based approach. Like, I didn't, now that I say that out loud, but I don't know. I think that just sort of too many journalists think of Twitter as like a place where you have to go to like, you know, like put your work out, and you go because there's an obligation, someone's making you like do it. And if you see it as a place where you can like bring things in and learn, I don't see how that isn't compelling.
Hi. Hi. You know, a lot of us spend most of our extra time doing these long form projects in addition to things we already do, and they're time consuming and we become obsessed. Where would you say the best places to put our efforts online are? Like, there's obviously many platforms, but should we be developing a blog? Should we be tweeting more? Like, what do you see as the most valuable use of time in terms of online activity?
Well, I think that everyone should have a personal website where, you know, you can, and I think that, you know, even if it's like, if you have a job where you can't, you know, produce anything that's outside your, you know, your place of work, at least you have a place that's just like, here's where I am. It's like, you know, staking your claim on the internet. So I think that, you know, that is a baseline, just like setting that up. It's interesting because I do think that frequently these, I know I sort of mentioned in passing at the end these passion projects that are sort of like self-owned and self-directed. One of the examples I really like is there's this woman, Gabby Dunn, who's a journalist in New York, who she did this project called 100 Interviews because she, you know, was like, she was, you know, just graduated and was like, all the jobs are like not substantive, you know, journalism jobs, and I really want to do this project, and did it on her own and got a ton of coverage for it, and ended up being sort of like a regular front of book contributor to the New York Times Magazine as a result of the thing that she undertook on her own. And, you know, and people will sort of say, this is just another version of like, should you write for free? But I think that there is something to, I mean, certainly when I was hiring people, I would always be like, well, what have you produced before? What can I look at to see if you can do this thing that I'm hiring for? And the great thing about the internet is you can kind of prove you can do the kind of thing you want to do. And granted, it's not going to be the same as if you were working with, you know, a more seasoned editor. But, you know, you can have collaborators. You know, for a long time before I had a staff editing job, I wrote for a blog called Feministing, where no one was a professional journalist, but it was like great to have a collective of people who were working on, you know, a publication or a project together. So I think that like that's a great place to put a certain amount of effort. You know, establishing like a basic internet presence and home base is sort of another. And after that, it just gets so specific to like you and your interests and your experience, and it's hard to say.
Hi, thank you. This was fantastic. Can you talk a little more, maybe from your experience at Good, how did you make money from, you know, as you saw your traffic rising and so on? I mean, what was the sort of revenue?
Well, basically, there were a couple of things going on. And I actually think that the business model that Good had is something that could really be taken and employed by places that did care about journalism. It had first of all, it had an agency side that after it had built this strong, you know, design brand and point of view, The agency side, which was disconnected from the editorial side, would do like, would make like an infographic for Levi's that wasn't branded with good, that wasn't created by our editorial staff, that was created by, the business side, and but was based on sort of our, aesthetic and process, and those sell for so many dollars. Infographics are very expensive for like companies to buy. So and other more traditional like agency work too. So that was sort of one thing, and the other thing is like I forget, I was talking to someone yesterday about this, but underwritten content, which is something that a lot of other media outlets have been loath to get involved in, and I sort of set the rule of like, if Patagonia wants to pay for us to do a series of essays about water scarcity in Africa, as long as Patagonia has zero sign-off at any point in like the editorial process. Basically, that's it. We agree, like, at the outset, their logo is going to be on this series, like, brought to you by Patagonia in the way that you would have an ad next to anything. And other than agreeing it will be a series about water scarcity in Africa, they have no say in anything that happens from that point forward. I actually think that that's a great model. It's just sort of like, based on brand affiliation, not on eyeballs. Patagonia wanted to be around the brand of good. And this is kind of fits into this idea of personality and point of view of a magazine, as opposed to sort of saying, I want 20,000 eyeballs, any 20,000 eyeballs. It was just like, it's cool for us to be associated with you. And, like Vice magazine, which is, like the opposite end of the spectrum from good. This is, this agency plus sort of like sponsored is like the core of their business model. And I'm in no way affiliated with Vice. But it's like, I think that like it's something that could be adopted. I think it's not a coincidence that both of those companies are completely founded, run, et cetera, by people who were not around for like the heyday of print media.
Hi, could you maybe talk about your experiences as a young woman in an executive editing position and maybe the challenges that job had?
I feel I've said too much about this already. Well, it's interesting too because even I just sort of was like future thinking companies like Good and Vice, but they're all still men. The senior management team at Good, which is people from the tech department and the agency side, and all over the company. I think there were like 10 or 12 people of the senior management team, and I was the only woman. So it's not exactly like the like new media. I don't know. I certainly faced a different set of problems when I was in DC. One of the reasons why I ended up quitting my job is I was a deputy editor at the magazine for when I was working on the print side for 3 years or something like that, and my boss was leaving, and he was great, like a great, not just like mentor to me, but like kind of just let me run with, like, just like assign the whole feature well, cool, like, and because he recognized that like that was something that I wanted to do and had the capacity to do, and when he said that he was leaving, I knew the founders of that magazine, who were all men in their, like, then, I think, late 60s, early 70s, and I knew the board members of that magazine, and I knew there was no way in hell they were going to make a 29-year-old woman the executive editor of that magazine, even if I had wanted to stay. And so that feeling of, like, you've kind of, like, yeah, it's a very common feeling at a job, right? Like, I can't go to the next level here, so, like, at that point, it's just, like, wine bottle under the desk mode, And that was like a lot more like classic, like there are old men who do not respect you as a smart journalist because you like to wear lipstick, kind of thing. It's just like a very, very old school. And the experience at somewhere like Good was just a little different in that, I think these things tend to play out more in terms of networks than about like overt sexism in younger generations. These guys, like, their friends are just guys, and their guys' friends are just guys, and it's just like just like this whole world of like it's a contained bro ecosystem, and so it really isn't this conscious like conscious, we don't know any women for this job, or but you want to work with your friends and you want to work with people you feel are proven entities, and so really to me it's just about that. They like sit down to think about who to hire and they're just like, God, just like where are the women? I don't know. It's like it's like Biodome. So I don't know. I think that I don't have too many, like no specific stories are coming to mind, but I was definitely acutely aware of my gender sitting in the room, as anyone who in this room has been the only something always is.
I was going to ask that, but something else.
Oh wait, there's one back there too, if you were going to ask the same one. Wait for that mic.
One of the things that concerns me about startups, and just as I look to where to put stories of mine, is don't we have so many places for our eyeballs and for people who love to read and learn, and we have so many messages, all of us. I mean, what scares me is like we need to collaborate and collect again, because how do we read your thing and her thing and his thing and my thing? And I don't know how you address that in what you're trying to do and doing one-offs and startups. And I think it's all great and we all need to show our personality and what we want to say, but it starts to look very, very cluttered out there. And I'm wondering how you address that.
Well, first of all, tomorrow is not sort of like an ongoing, one of the reasons why, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we aren't doing it in an ongoing way, but I actually think that it worked better as a project given the moment it was in, and was not, like, doesn't really, like, the concept itself is not strong enough to stand absent our narrative, like, that birthed it. You know what I mean? So I think that it's too close to, like, Fast Company, or it's too close to, like, The Verge, or, other, startups, not startups, but, like, other publications that have a similar worldview. So I totally hear what you're saying about that. And I think that, the thing is, like, those startups are just going to fail, right? Like the startups that are not bringing something that is like so great it rises above what someone else is doing, and the places that are sort of just replicating the work that's done elsewhere are just not going to survive. And I think it is a real problem that projects that don't really have like 2, 5, 10-year futures are taking resources from projects that may have a proven track record, but that is not just a media problem by far. That is just like people like what is new in general. And so yeah, I hear you, but it's sort of like it's one of those like, how do we solve sexism? Like it's like it's like a big problem that we exist in and are suffering from in our own way.
I'm going to ask the naive question, how do you make those little movies without spending all your time online finding the perfect little snippet?
Right. So I wrote a thing for the Pointer Institute, which is sort of everything you need to know about GIFs if you're a journalist. Just like search my name, GIFs, journalism, Pointer, whatever, and you will find it. The answer is I don't make them. They are just all over the internet. You just have to know where to look and how to search. Mostly Tumblr. And although there have been recently, like a few, Google recently announced it was going to add sort of like a filter on image search where you could search for just GIFs. I don't know if it was going to be just animated or anything with the file name .gif, because there are some static GIFs too. It's also technically pronounced GIF, but like I just can't. I just can't. I'm perpetuating the mispronunciation. So anyway, so there's a couple of search engines that I feel like for people who aren't like deep in like tween girl Tumblr internet like I am, we'll make it more accessible. And there are a couple of places where you can make them pretty easily without having Photoshop or anything. And that's all in that article. And I also kind of address the copyright issue, which is interesting because when I talked to a media copyright, media law expert, and he was sort of like, yeah, it's weird because it's like, who's the creator? Is it the person who made the original thing? Is it the person who like cut the specific clip that makes the GIF? Like, he was just like, I don't know, and and then and so I don't know. I also interviewed a bunch of people who actually do make them on Tumblr, and sort of was like, do you feel upset when you see your stuff used without attribution? When you're like, oh, no one else is that into Working Girl. Like, that is obviously my GIF. Like, I made that. That's the one that's all over Tumblr now. Do you feel upset when you see it without your name attached? And they, and this is by no means like, a comprehensive study or anything, but they all kind of were like, well, no, that's the culture of Tumblr. It's like, one of the reasons why I make it is I hope it just goes everywhere. And so I don't know. I just encourage you to read that article. Yeah.
I was curious, when you were at Good, how much of the problem do you think was geek culture versus journalism? Like, for me, I was publishing an online magazine put out by CERN, Birthplace of the World Wide Web. Okay, my office mate taught coding to Tim Berners-Lee. And to these folks, what do you mean you don't know how to build a laptop from scratch? And to them, anything that was not computers and not software was, well, it was simple, it was easy. A tweet to them was the same as an in-depth, months-long investigative report for the New York Times on Watergate. So they just didn't get intellectual property and the effort of journalism.
I think it was more about, I mean, they definitely were more steeped in that culture than in like old media culture, which is why I sort of highlight that difference. But it's not like Good as a tech company. It's not like it makes stuff or like made stuff before I came in and was like, the stuff we now make is journalism. It was always kind of a journalistic or pseudo-journalistic project. And an agency too. So it's not. I do think though that this is. I go to a lot of like tech and design conferences, and I do think that I've never encountered the attitude among maybe it's just because it's always like media and technology people, but that it doesn't take a long time to make good journalism. Like, I think I've generally encountered respect for that in the tech world. I think, but again, it's like maybe as soon as my back is turned, they're like, like we built that. What is she doing all day? I don't know.
I guess for me, it wasn't so much disrespect, it's not understanding how much time and labor it takes.
Right. But I mean, most journalists don't understand how much time and labor it takes to program and build and write code. So I feel like that's more of just a communication gap in general.
Hi, can you touch on how you infuse your personality into like your Twitter presence and your blog, while at the same time maintaining that kind of professional poise? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like the line.
I don't know how much professional poise I have left. I don't know. I was thinking about this. Someone who was just starting her career was asking me this question, and in some ways, the fact that I was a couple of years into my career when I was like, like YOLO, I'm gonna start writing things about driving with my pants off or whatever, Like I was already established as having had some real jobs. So maybe that's part of it, like there was a foundation of work that was laid. And I don't know, I think that there is something to saying things that seem kind of lowbrow, but that betray a real intelligence or like a depth of knowledge, and that's one thing that's really attractive to me about gifs. You can be talking about like media funding or something that is kind of deep and in some ways it's really complicated, but if you kind of say it's like this emotion, there's that, and that is certainly my personality, I've made that match. That's there are a couple little ways like that to do it, I think. Also just sort of asking yourself every time you're tweeting a headline or just retweeting someone, it's would I really say it this way? Is there a funnier way? How would I say this to a friend in GChat? Just asking yourself if your Twitter feed is matching the way you really talk to people. And I think that one of the things that's been valuable about working on my column at The Cut is that they really encourage that. Sometimes I'll have little asides, I wrote a column actually about being a boss last week, and I included this passage that I like, oh God, this is like way confessional. I don't usually go like this far, but I admitted I had like copied this passage from Granta into my journal longhand. I actually wrote that on the internet. And then I was just like, I felt so like ick about it that I wrote like so emo, right? Like, and it was almost like a note to my editor, and they left it into the final piece. And I actually love how it reads, but so some of it too is when it comes to your work that is not on Twitter, that is like, you know, a collaboration with an editor, like, you know, always ask. And I think that as an editor, it's pretty easy to strip out voice, and it's impossible to infuse it. So, you know, err on the side of being voicey and rely on your editor, which I hope is already just like a beautiful, meaningful relationship in your life to walk you back. I can't, yeah, right there.
I've been struggling with how to phrase this question, but I'll give it a go. Could you talk a little bit? What I'm wondering about is the difference between delivery mechanism and content, because, and I'll use myself maybe or as an example, but so if I see myself in the you pre-internet relationship, as far as excuses about Twitter, my problem personally, I'm perfectly fluent in meme and gifs, and I have no problem with Byliner or Slate or whatever other example you want as a delivery mechanism. But I have a problem seeing how the content that I want to deliver, whether it's by temperament or ability, how that relates to Twitter or Tumblr, you know. So if so could you talk about that?
So you're basically like the stuff that you think is important, like doesn't really take off on those platforms? I don't.
Yeah, maybe. Or like, here's another way. Like, forgive me now. If I'm a young gay Talese growing up today, working hard on Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, how am I going to use Twitter or Tumblr? I mean.
Well, okay, so
or the internet or gifs or anything.
The outline for Frank Sinatra Has a Cold recently made the rounds on Tumblr again, which is something that I maybe seen like in J school but hadn't seen in a really long time, and so. You know, I looked at it and it prompted me to reread the story for the first time in ages. And you know, he's got a bunch of notes at the top of it that are about sort of like what he's thinking as he's gotten the assignment. Like, you know, there's I maybe I should pull it up. But anyway, but he is talking about like, maybe I'll rent a convertible and ride with him in a convertible, and maybe my editor says X or Y, or like there's some kind of like clearly like, you know, personality type thoughts that maybe he was considering including in like the lead, or like maybe he was going to use, but were really just sort of like teases for this cool assignment that he got at this particular moment in time. You know, the editors had been wanting to profile him, blah, blah, blah. And I think that like that type of material, which is kind of what I was saying about Mac's tweets about the BP oil spill, especially things that kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. She had one that I didn't screen cap that was about, you know, like a BP official calling her toots or something. And, you know, it's just like little things like that where it's like, I hate them a little bit more now. And also like what it's like to be in your shoes, and like just like really kind of revealing like with this tiny little thing. I think that there are ways to get at that without revealing your hand for the feature.
So like establishing a personality in a sense as a way to sell both you and the piece later.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And don't even think of it as a way to sell you in the piece. Think of it as sort of like, yeah, I mean, no, for sure though, but like a way to sort of like, if you think about, there are people who like your work and who like the person you're profiling or are interested in the subject you're writing about, like, I'm sure that they would be interested in little details like that. Yeah. Great, we solved it. I'm really, really pleased that no one asked, but how will we eat? I was threatening to make that the first question that I just was going to ask myself so that we could get it off the table, but this has just been great. Well. This is you know, sorry, I did this myself. Like, we can talk about it later, okay?
I actually wanted to ask you a question about that, because you mentioned not having a problem with sort of sponsors that were in line with your personality and your, I suppose, although you didn't say it, maybe ethics of what you want to do. which was once upon a time just called an advertiser. But I think it's switched so much so that as readers, because of blogs and everything, we're so afraid of advertising. And I wrote for Advertising Age magazine for a long time.
Oh, I love advertising.
Yeah, so do I, and it's so crucial, and branding, and they come up with these great ideas. And the marriage of agency and publication, I think, is such a great idea. But how, I guess the question is, I mean, did that, you think that sort of worked for good, but you just didn't like what was wrong with that? If the model was good.
That was not the prevailing problem there.
Right.
Right. I'm stoked to report that was not the core problem.
How could you do it well?
What's that?
How could you do that well, the marriage of good narrative and almost like an agency?
I mean, I don't know what happens behind the scenes at Vice, but I have to believe that, like, put through a different editorial lens, like someone could probably adopt the structure of that company with some success. Great. And we did the money question. Thanks, you guys.